This is your last chance. After this...
Or should we not follow the advice of the galactically stupid?
That is a nice boulder.
Ludicrous speed! Go!
Ladies and gentlemen, coming to you pre-recorded from two undersized apartments in New York City, it's Revenge of the Film Nerds.
There, we're in a tight spot.
I hate when people talk during the movie.
With your hosts, Black Crystal.
I'm not bad. I'm just drawn that way.
And Jack Manley.
What we've got here is failure to communicate.
A podcast for nerds by nerds.
Oh, you betcha, yeah.
Failure is not an option.
And now, here are your hosts, Black Crystal and Jack Manley.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to yet another episode of Revenge of the Film Nerds. I am so excited to be here with the one, the only Manly Jack. Manly Jack, how are you doing today?
I'm feeling pretty good. You know, we're getting back in the groove. We're having a nice February. Every film that we're discussing has to do something with love, but it's all tragic. So as a single person, I love it.
Oh, I'm here for it. You know I love it. Romance with tragedy is the only way I take it, and that might be saying something about myself.
It's the only way. It's the only way for us single people to enjoy the Valentine's season, BK. Just stomping all over your whimsy. That's what we live for, right?
Yes. Oh, I'm so here for it. And that being said, we have an amazing special feature, I'd like to call it today, with two films that seem to have really good relevance, and we had to talk about them. So, Jack, what are we covering today?
Well, we are covering a double feature of one short film and one feature because they are linked together forever in subject matter. We are looking at 1962's La Jetée, which was written, directed, and photographed by Chris Marker, and that film was the basis for the 1995 blockbuster 12 Monkeys, directed by Terry Gilliam, written by David and Janet Peoples, and with production design of great note by Jeffrey Beecroft. And BK, it's such an interesting dynamic that we get to talk through today because we've approached the exact same story pretty much through opposite sides of the spectrum, different perspectives on films about perspective.
Oh, yes. I love this title. You know me, sci-fi head, time head. This is exactly what I want to get into. So for 12 Monkeys, that film really got me. And I told Jack, I was like, we've got to do this on the pod. We've got to do this. And he's like, oh, but like, have you heard of this like French film? And I'm like, whoa. What are you talking about? So the moment you told me about this, I was like, oh, this is a no-brainer. We've got to do this. I need to experience this blind with you on this end. And now you, Jack, must experience 12 Monkeys with me. I demand it.
And experience it I did. And I was so glad that I could introduce you to the source material of La Jetée because it has a very special place in my heart. When I was 17 years old, going into my senior year of high school, this was the time I was definitely invested with getting into the film world, doing as much as I can over the summer to further that dream of going into film school. I was in the NYU, I believe it was like the Rising Filmmakers program in Dublin in that summer of 2007. And my teacher, Robert Pietri, the instructor for the whole 6 weeks I was there, the very first film he showed us in its entirety was La Jetée. And it was important to him as a base for that film education because La Jetée is such an interesting experimental film in that it really doesn't use moving pictures. It uses still photography to create this mode of science fiction. And so you go through this photographic montage and this brilliant story of romance, of love, of loss, and of time travel. and you see it evolve over 33 years into something like 12 Monkeys. It's amazing how potent it is as a story. So I'm ready to get into it, but we've got a lot to go into here because time travel is such a rich subject, BK, and I know you in particular are an aficionado.
Oh man, aficionado. What would I call that? Am I a time lord? I don't know. I like it. But here's the thing. When it comes to the idea of the fate, philosophy, all of this idea of destiny and time travel and character development, that's the juicy bits. And both of these films honestly have so much of it in it, which was so exciting. So I'm really happy to kind of get it started with that BK synopsis, because we gotta let them know what we're getting into.
Well, let's do it, because we made a challenge to ourselves this week, BK, because we're doing two films that are so closely linked. We really wanted to see if we could nail this synopsis down so that it was one synopsis for both films at the same time. And I think you might have got it for us, but let's see what you got with it.
Here we go. After the end of the world, a group of doctors enlist volunteers and prisoners to act as guinea pigs in time travel experiments performed in an effort to save the present. While many are driven mad, one man is able to become unstuck in time and visit the past through a strong connection to an image of a woman from his memory and an image of death. Will the man be able to find answers that can save the present, or will he be doomed to fail in his attempt to become free for time for the woman he loves?
Yeah, I think it's just vague enough to work.
So the reason why this was difficult, though, is because 12 Monkeys does do its own thing, but it is very true to the source material, La Jetée. So I feel like the best way to kind of start talking about 12 Monkeys is really talk about La Jetée and what that experience is. Because my God, Jack, when you put that on my screen, first of all, that is the best 24 minutes of my life. I've never been so immersed and captivated, ever, other than maybe when I watch Attack on Titan.
Hard to compete with anime in your eyes. I know that much, BK.
Absolutely. But it was something to be said. I was very surprised you didn't brief me on photographs. Like, we've got to talk about that off top before we get into what actually goes down. The presentation of this short film was fascinating. I've never seen this sort of kind of visual novel movie style thing going on with like narration and very active like image switching. It was super interesting.
La Jetée is one of my favorite films to reference from the French New Wave movement, because it is a prime example of what that style of filmmaking was all about. Now, it's interesting, like, in thinking about this film, you realize that it breaks, in that presentation, a lot of what Hollywood's rules are for film. It is, very personal. It is not about spectacle. It is not really about plot. It is character and emotion-driven work. And you have to understand, BK, this was a real passion, a real drive of French filmmakers and of Italian filmmakers as well in the neo-realist movement in the wake of World War II. Now, BK, if you know your history at all, you know that Europe was in complete ruins after 1945. Everyone everywhere on the continent was having to rebuild a semblance of what life would be like moving forward. And as a result, there was just this massive void within culture, especially in societies like France and Italy, where culture has been such a linchpin of the national identity. So the answer was this new emerging 20th century art of film. Because at the time that the war was ending, an embargo was lifted on foreign film going to Europe, and this gave all of these young budding filmmakers access to the work of Hitchcock and Hawks and John Ford and others. And that's where this belief in this auteur, one creative at the top, driven spirit came from.
Wow. Okay, so panning this out, right? I get what you were saying. Post World War II, everybody's in shambles. Let's be real, specifically Europe. My God. And I'm gathering that some of my favorite niches and genres are kind of coming from this, because it really kind of feels like that's where, these dystopian kind of takes on reality kind of come from. Am I mistaken for attributing that to like French New Wave vibe? Because that's the kind of feeling I get is where it comes from.
You're not wrong. The real root of that dystopian kind of depiction of life, specifically centered around working class and middle class people, was really developed in the Italian neo-realist movement first in the late 40s. The first really potent example is specifically the film Rome Open City. But the New Wave had that very similar vibe to it in that it wanted to be about personal stories. There was a belief among the European auteurs of the 50s and 60s that mainstream Hollywood film had truly lost its connection to people. They believed it lacked sincerity as an art form. So this is why you had the reactions of people like Francois Truffaut with the 400 Blows and Shoot the Piano Player. Why you had films like Jean-Luc Godard's Breathless coming out of France at the time. There was a real inward focus on deep personal drama and deep sort of personal experience within these broken and redeveloping societies. It was a focus on people that had to rebuild from a time of great trauma. And so it really is the birth of that dystopian vibe, but in a much more focused way. And of course, New Wave would become the sensibility that would motivate New Hollywood, which would in turn motivate the independent scene of the 90s. But all of this rich film tradition and all of these personal stories, we really owe to the Europeans for looking at Hollywood and saying, we need to get away from the spectacle, we need to bring back the personal. And La Jetée is about that in spades. Yes, it is a time travel sci-fi piece, but at the very core of it, it is about the man moving through the story, this boy who witnessed death early in his life, and yet has to go through the trauma of watching his world destroyed and of being experimented upon to try and restore humanity to something it used to be. Tell me that's not the story of World War II in Europe, BK.
Honestly, when you put it together like that, you sit there and you're like, wow, like you can actually see it. Now I'm like, oh man, maybe I like a little bit more history than I led myself on, because I'm truly fascinated at this like discovery. And shout outs to the Europeans, yo. Like, thank God, because like I don't like the spectacle, man. You know I'm all about the character development.
We're very lucky that we had this very special eclectic mix of very motivated, very vain in some cases, like Federico Fellini, but very motivated and very passionate creators to give us these worlds. And so that's where the tradition that Chris Marker is really a part of. And it was important for these people to not just break those conventions of, character over plot. They did things like handheld shooting for the first time. They were the first filmmakers, or some of the first filmmakers, to work purely with available light, with shooting only on locations. They were the first people to experiment with jump cuts and nonlinear sequences. These roots of the directors like Scorsese and Tarantino that are in the zeitgeist to this day come from these movements. And so Marker's choice of using a photographic montage for La Jetée comes as a result of the necessity of this movement to break conventions. It's really interesting to see that this is the direct tradition that 12 Monkeys comes from an artistic perspective.
Oh, I love it. It's really fascinating, because I feel like the ways I can see these kind of themes and these traditions you were saying bleed through is really from the tone off the top, like through both films. The way both films, La Jetée and 12 Monkeys, like set the stage to really bring you in from the very beginning. And I know I kind of getting off into the plot, but like, my goodness, like, you've got to just take a chance to sit down seriously and experience it. I can feel why this is such a divergent from the norm. You hardly watch anything right now that kind of just grips you in to the point where you're locked in, you're strapped in, you're buckled up, and you're ready for the ride. And my God, We went on a ride yesterday. Okay, Jack. I'm still recovering from the experience of the double feature. So you've gotta reel me back in, put me into the know, because I know you had time to actually digest this because you're really good at this for some reason. God, I don't know, all that schooling. Jesus, lucky you. But
has to be good for something.
Right. So how did we get this source material to create 12 Monkeys? Like, how did we get from here being groundbreaking and innovating? Because the photographic take in storytelling, the use of narration, the use of audible sounds to set the stage, and really just telling a very straightforward story. How did we know that was a story we needed to tell and make it be something for the main stage?
Well, in keeping with our subject matter for today, I'm going to be jumping around in time a little bit here to give you the history. You know, we've covered this mid-20th century movement of French New Wave that was able to produce a piece like La Jetée, which was able to use very minimal and clever design to create a sci-fi film on a shoestring budget using very basic, techniques, the type of stuff that you could go out and shoot right now on your iPhone if you wanted to. But that aspect of it creatively is undergirded by the real subject matter of time travel that is such a pivotal focus in both La Jetée and 12 Monkeys. And time travel, today it is absolutely something that is germane to popular culture and is something that is used as a trope throughout narrative fiction, with many schools of thought on it. In particular, the one that comes to mind is Terminator's school of just not caring about time whatsoever and it functioning just as an entertainment value. But 12 Monkeys and La Jetée kind of fall on the opposite end of that spectrum, where time travel is a specific narrative motivation and device through which the story can move. And that tradition really began in the late 19th century. The early story that anyone's able to find thus far is 1881's The Clock That Went Backwards by Edward Page Mitchell. Now, this was only recently discovered, BK. Like, we did not know the story existed, or rather it was lost, I should say, until the 1970s. From a period of, say, the 1910s all the way through 1970, we really thought the work of H.G. Wells was the first time travel fiction that existed. And then finally somebody found this story in an archive that had, never been preserved from its original printing.
I don't know, man. Was it found? Was it lost? Was it put there from the future? I'm not convinced, Space. Nope, Jack. No.
It does feel a bit like going down a rabbit hole researching the history of time travel in fiction. Every time you find a story, you find another story that is referenced in a larger form. The first example of a foreign language time travel story that I was able to come across was Enrique Gaspar de Rimbaud's I'm going to get this right, BK. El Anacronopete.
Hey, there you go.
That was a Spanish story about time travel. H.G. Wells had The Time Machine written in 1895 after he wrote the short story The Chronic Argonauts in 1888. And in novelization, this was considered to be the most popular and most ubiquitous time travel story. But the first adaptation of a time travel story was Mark Twain's A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, which was made into 3 separate film adaptations before 1950.
Holy cow, I didn't even know that. You put me on. I'm like, yo, I've got a rabbit hole to dive down post-podcast right now.
I mean, I'm going to be right there with you. There's just so much divergent, different history around time travel stories, and all of them seem to have very different takes on the way that time works, and they run into different temporal paradoxes as a result. Now, folks, for those of you who don't nerd out like time travel the way that BK and I do, temporal paradoxes is a shorthand way of discussing all the problems that happen with various different types of time travel. It's stuff like the grandfather paradox, where, if you go back in time and something were to happen to a grandparent of yours, meaning your mother or father was never born and therefore you were never born, would that immediately eradicate your existence? Now, 12 Monkeys does not draw its own sort of path there. Neither does La Jetée. They go into what I would refer to as the Slaughterhouse-Five or Billy Pilgrim interpretation of time travel. Now, BK, you are familiar, I'm guessing, with Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five. I'm guessing you probably read it in an English class at some point, right?
Oh, yeah. Let me tell you. Lit is amazing. AP Lit, let's go.
I think that was where I came across it, too. It was one of those books that I remember actually picking up and enjoying. You know, some books you pick up for school, it's a chore. That one was a pleasure. But on the subject of time travel within Slaughterhouse-Five, Billy Pilgrim, the principal character, he is unstuck in time, essentially. He is not choosing to go to any one moment or another. His existence simply passes through time in different ways and at different intervals from you or I, whereas we have a linear timeline. He's all over the place. And this is the kind of time travel that exists within these worlds. In both La Jetée and 12 Monkeys, time travel is an essential narrative device, but at no point do any of the characters experiencing time travel have any ability to change the events around them because the events are already predetermined. This is a temporal paradox known as the causal loop. The idea that past events happen because future events happen, therefore future events happen because past events happen, and all of time exists in a Mobius strip, essentially. And while there are certain contradictions about that paradox, I don't know about you, BK, I kind of find that interpretation of time travel to be the most seemingly accurate to my sensibilities, or the most logical, if you will.
Oh, totally. I think, here we go. There's so much to get into. I'm glad you did this because, this is why this is a podcast for nerds by nerds, because time travel is what we like, all right?
Oh yeah, we just lost the casual audience the moment I said the word paradox earlier.
They're like, stop listening, sign off. What was 12 Monkeys? I thought it was about monkeys. I'm out. If you want to go a little bit mainstream to bring it in, right? I mean, the thing we know most currently is time travel involving the Avengers, which doesn't really follow that mold at all. It's actually like the opposite side of the spectrum, where we're creating different divergent realities and things like that, where it kind of gets out of hand, but at the end of the day, we get a pretty bow, right? And I think that's why people like that. The problem with what we're talking about, what we see within 12 Monkeys, it's the limitations of the time travel involving causal, how do I say that? Yeah.
Causal loop.
Yeah, causal loop, right? I'm like, how do you say that word, man? That is a weird word. But, that causality of, having those cause and effect things and, things being predestined because, past events create future events, it really pays for super interesting narratives, especially in the way of storytelling. So I love this method. I absolutely, absolutely love this method so much. I think the other method gets a little wishy-washy, but there are some great works, Butterfly Effect does that. I mean, even the anime Erased plays with time in similar ways, with a tragic hero getting lost in time. And I think that's the trope that I really, really like and kind of fall honing in on both of these films that we're talking about today, is that tragic time traveler. I don't know if I want to be that guy. We see that in Tracer's story in Overwatch. She's just lost in time. I feel so bad for these people just floating out there. So I'm like, how do we tell this story where it's something that leaves you with a lasting impression? And that usually is the most difficult thing, rather than just putting it on a bow. What's something that leads you up to this idea of still thinking, still wondering if the paradox is fixed, where do we go, what will be the future, those questions. And I think La Jetée and 12 Monkeys do this exceptionally.
And I love that you brought up time travel in making your point in the context of the Avengers, because that really is, from moving beyond those initial works of narrative fiction that we discussed, especially The Time Machine, time travel really was that kind of B-movie niche, kitschy kind of structure. It was a subject that was for, it was for the B-movie. But then in the 80s is when stuff like James Cameron's Terminator and Robert Zemeckis' Back to the Future started to really capture the public imagination and, more importantly, their wallets. And this was the world in which executive producer Robert Cosberg decided he wanted to resurrect the story of La Jetée. Now, he absolutely loved Chris Marker's work, to the point where he persuaded the director, rather reluctantly, to let him pitch the concept of La Jetée for a feature at Universal. And this was the beginning of the 12 Monkeys process, BK.
Oh, you know, this is where I love it to see it all come together. Oh my gosh. So I'm glad that you said that. So boom, context history-wise, Back to the Future, Terminator coming out, and like time travel is not so niche. It's a little bit more mainstream. Let's go off with one of the best time travel stories you might have seen. Okay, I am so hyped to find out that the producer's like a fanboy of the source material. Like, let's go nerds.
I mean, 12 Monkeys is an interesting story for me in terms of putting together the production, because it was a real labor of love from the producers. I mean, Cosberg is the one that got the subject material at Universal and got them to sort of also reluctantly buy the rights. It was another producer associated with the project who got Terry Gilliam to sign on because he was so enamored with the director's work on Brazil. And Gilliam had just abandoned an adaptation of The Tale of Two Cities and was not someone who liked to take on other people's work. He really is that auteur spirit. You know, Terry Gilliam would have fit right in with the French New Wave because he loved to write and control his own work. And yet he was so captivated by the script the Peoples wrote and the way that they studied madness and perception and dreams that he felt like going on to the project would be a good call for him personally. And interestingly enough, BK, this was the third film in a row that he had done which focused on these kind of concepts, because he had just come off of The Adventures of Baron Munchausen and The Fisher King.
Oh, wow. Okay, so, whoa, yes. Also, I love the fact that the Peoples, that is a last name, that's a husband and wife, if I'm correct, right, Jack?
That's correct.
Let's go power couple. Like, I had to stop on that for a second, because that's what got me. I was like, okay, so you mean to tell me this power couple wrote the script? Because, like, chef's kiss. This is like a baby. This is like a precious child being born with the way you're telling me the story is unfolding of like, hey, look, I like this idea. Give me in on this project. Give me in on this project. But to hear that the thing that captivated them the most wasn't necessarily the time travel, but more so like that deep character depth that we all kind of really talked about how much we liked earlier. So I'm freaking out. I'm like, what is going on? We are right there. I want to be there. Put me back in time for this creation. I want to relive it, okay?
Yeah, I agree with you, BK. I think it's really cool to see Gilliam take a chance on this, especially a project where there were a lot of issues that were not related to the film or its execution or getting it made, at least initially on the outset. The issues were really studio-based. It was the reluctance to acquire the rights. It was the massive delays in greenlighting the project because Universal had sunk so much money in Waterworld, which is now infamous for being a box office flop, that they couldn't really get the money. But guess what, BK? A hero from a previous episode of the podcast is about to do a repeat act. Now, remember when we talked about Luc Besson getting The Fifth Element made, and how a critical factor to his green light was that Bruce Willis loved the script and was willing to take a cut rate?
I do. That's my favorite story that we covered when we talked about Fifth Element on the podcast. So you mean to tell me that my boy Bruce Willis done did it again?
The film was essentially greenlit and was ready to move forward, but couldn't move forward due to these financial difficulties. And after conversations with Terry Gilliam, Bruce Willis lowered his rate for 12 Monkeys also.
He's an angel sent from the heavens above. Team Bruce Willis all day.
I know people are coming down hard on the guy because he had a breakdown with mask protocols and all that and had some difficulty with that. Listen, we're all struggling during the pandemic. This guy, if you look at his conduct as a professional around his peers, he seems to be the type of person you want working with you because he will actually believe in your projects. I got to give him a lot of props here. Is he had a relationship with Gilliam sort of on and off, knowing each other as professionals since he was involved in the casting process for The Fisher King. But Willis, really did go out on a limb here and take risks in the mid-90s to rebuild his image, and it's really incredible to see him do so in a way that helped further creative work rather than just looking out for his own interest. I think it's a very interesting and fine balance he's drawn here by doing things like that.
Oh, I love it. It's dope to see. It brings like hope to me, or at least maybe fuels my romanticism of film creation. But like seeing people come together for the love of the project is everything to me. So to find out that Bruce Willis is one of those guys, I'm like, all right, cool. You know what? I kind of mess with you. All right, I might like you. You in my top when I'm like, yo, who I want to watch. Yeah, you got something with Bruce Willis on? Because, like, he always comes through. And everything he's in is just very provoking in a very interesting way. So that's what I really like, the kind of works that he's involved in.
And that's the thing about 12 Monkeys, is at very least with the cast, there was a lot of serendipity there. Madeleine Stowe was on board the Tale of Two Cities film that Gilliam was working on, but when that got aborted, Gilliam immediately had her in mind for the role in 12 Monkeys. Gilliam was not a fan, however, of Brad Pitt being cast for the part of Jeffrey Goings in the story, but it was his casting director who said that this was the guy you want to go with. And Pitt repaid that faith in casting him by making this a labor of love in his own acting study. He went to a mental institution specifically to study the mannerisms of people who suffer from mental illness and to give authenticity to his performance. And while this film was going on, this is the exact moment in time when he exploded as an A-lister, because he was coming off of Interview with a Vampire, Legends of the Fall, and Seven. So 12 Monkeys got that bump at the box office by having Brad Pitt's name on the project. But BK, that was really kind of the last of the good news, because the production was hell for them, it sounds like.
Oof, right. I'm seeing here, right, budget constraints, one. But when you come in with, like, weather problems and things like that, that's when things start getting very difficult. So what went down on set?
Well, they had to shoot it all in Baltimore and in Philadelphia, and they were shooting it all on location, again in that kind of French New Wave style, which is very fitting for the setup of this film. But they had huge weather problems with the locations they were working at, because they weren't using sound stages. They didn't have access to them or the budget to rent them. They were using abandoned buildings as sound stages, structures that did not necessarily have the weatherproofing that a professional Hollywood studio would have. And so it would lead to a lot of issues with things like continuity errors, with things like aborted takes and reshoots, things that really had to get addressed to make the film serious and to make it work as something that could be edited into a feature film. And even off of set, there were issues. Terry Gilliam, during the making of this film, got injured while he was horseback riding. It was just kind of a very difficult, challenging shoot for everyone involved. And yet, because Gilliam was so mortified by the reputation he had received due to his overruns and going over budget on Munchausen, he was determined to do this on a good schedule. And amazingly, he shot it under budget, and he only had 1 week of overtime on the actual shooting of the film. So they did a magnificent job getting this in the can.
Wow. Hey, look, all I have to say is you got my boy Brad Pitt on there. Like, you knew something was going to be good, all right? So he knew he had to do what he had to do. And under budget, yo, that's how you get hired again. Let's be real, Jack. That's how you get hired again by a studio.
Oh, yeah. In Hollywood, that's a unicorn.
Right. So that's dope, though. So putting it together, getting those time constraints, and really working hard to kind of give this authentic image. Honestly, there's a lot of pressure on the production team and on the cast. So I'm really, like, I guess, relieved to hear that they were so invested in seeing it come to life that it sounds like it was worth it, because my experience has been fantastic. So I'm going to give you your flowers, you guys. There you go. Thank you for this.
Oh, yeah. It comes across as a very professional and very well-refined work. The chaos of the film is organized very masterfully. And the set pieces, as they are with La Jetée, are done with a lot of intention and a lot of purpose. So BK, I want you to go ahead and start leading us through 12 Monkeys, because I think it'll be a good exercise for us to really kind of focus in on the feature and to bring in those elements of La Jetée that really influence certain aspects of the story as we go along.
Awesome. I think it's dope to start with the starting card just to kind of bring it full circle, because when in time travel, every little detail matters, which is why I love it. But the film does start off with a quote from a schizophrenic in 1990, which is super important once you get through the series. But it's talking about the state of the world, really setting the stage and just laying out pretty much what we're going to get into, as in billions of people are dead because of a virus. Animals roam the land, and really see what we're going to do with our protagonist as we jump straight from that to an amazing flashback, which is in the same line of La Jetée. Again, similar setup, similar startup of giving you that world building right off the top, setting the stage, setting the tone, and then boom, bringing it in to this child's perspective that I feel like, Jack, you really honed in on that kind of full connection of what this image and this moment that this main character has.
Well, it's funny because it's laid out very clearly and explicitly in the English language narration of La Jetée. It's said that this child who is out viewing airplanes witnesses a man dying and remembers the face of a woman. And lo and behold, at the very beginning of 12 Monkeys, you see a child see a man die and see a woman's face. You see this imprint on the character James Cole's mind. So as he wakes up in his cot underground, being told he's been volunteered for experiments in a set piece that looks like it might as well be the underground galleries La Jetée was shot in, you're ready for it. You understand that this guy is haunted by a vision and that he has been selected maybe because he has this potent reality. That's not necessarily made clear in the feature the way it is in Chris Marker's work, where people are being chosen specifically for the fact that they have visceral memories and the ability to conceptualize the past. Here, Cole is volunteered, BK.
Yeah, it's a good distinction, and it's also really cool to kind of set the films apart because it does show right there where the emphasis is going to be placed, right? In La Jetée, it's like really about that mind's image, the mental fortitude, but I feel like with 12 Monkeys, it's more about the idea of like a little bit of free will, a little bit of ideas of themes of predestination that I think they want to incorporate and add to the story, because I don't think they shy away from the themes that La Jetée have. So it's so cool to see that right off the bat. And if you have that background knowledge, you're like already know what's going to happen. So you're looking for little, bits and pieces. It makes the experience so much more fun having that there. And your point about the set pieces, like, yes, when he's underground, like it literally looks like the same shots that in the photos that were used in La Jetée. Like, how did we find these on location places that look so gorgeous in these abandoned warehouses? Like, shout outs to the prop teams and then the set scouts, because like, Jesus Lord, like I need a side by side.
You know what the amazing thing is in the interest of saving money, a lot of that was not necessarily props. A lot of it is just the fact that that's the way power stations work, BK, because those futuristic scenes were shot around power stations. But you are right to credit the prop team in this regard. They were very critical in the production design about being honest with the plot. So they used only technology that was current at the time of the film. They didn't conceive of new future technologies or anything like that. Everything was quote-unquote pre-1996 technology, so that they could show through the production design just how decayed and desperate this world is. There has been no human advancement whatsoever in this world, BK. These are desperate people who are exploring time because it is the only option left to them. It is a desperate search, and that is why they are driving people mad. That is why, people are being killed by these experiments in both films. It is because humanity has been driven to the brink. But you don't need to be told that necessarily through the information. It comes across to you by how desperate of an endeavor it actually is.
I love that you point that out, because on an initial watch through, I think you're not really thinking about those things at the top, because honestly in 12 Monkeys, we're being frank, it is a bit over the top in that vein of Fifth Element, where this futurism style is a little weird. Now I don't know if that's just a French thing or but it has this steampunky kind of comical in their glasses and in the way they kind of look, but still very gritty, very edgy, very tragic. So I'm glad you noted that, because even with that, you still get that intensity of, here is the stakes of the future, here is the setting of the world, and it is not a bright one, let me tell you that. And that's further bolstered by the fact when our boy Bruce Willie, because that's his only name in everything he's in, he's always Bruce Willie, okay? He comes up to the surface, and we see pretty much what is this, Snowpiercer reality? Winter and ruins of a forgotten town, and we get a little sneak peek, which we don't have in La Jetée, about what the future looks like outside. I thought that was a cool addition.
It's an interesting addition. I think it does a good job here of showing the audience what the real stakes are. You needed to show them an uninhabited world in the same way that La Jetée shows photos of a ruined post-war Europe to create this identity of a World War III that has happened that results in the events of that film. And so it's a really important set piece to have so that you understand when Bruce Willis, as James Cole, when he gets sent back, you have this context, you have the why. But the interesting thing is that La Jetée, it becomes a more personal story, as does 12 Monkeys when these time jumps happen. But the stakes in La Jetée are raised by the events themselves. The stakes get raised in 12 Monkeys when James Cole ends up back in time, meets Dr. Riley, and ends up being institutionalized through an arrest. And you want to talk crazy, BK. We go way off into crazy with the off-kilter, very surreal world of the mental asylum.
Oh, yes. I think what's really cool is honestly the entry point there. Cole, aka Bruce Willie, is amazing at what he does. You always see him as a tough guy, although a bit vulnerable. You do see him unhinged here, which is really dope. From when he gets captured, brings in by the police, and pretty much this time travel situation seems to have gone horribly wrong, because now we're trapped in an asylum. And I think that's a really cool play on the source material, right? In La Jetée, it is pretty straightforward. It's we're going to test out time travel. We're going to see how it works. We're still not certain on its capability, if we can actually accomplish things. While in 12 Monkeys, it's pretty solidified. It's hey, we've done this. We send people back in time. This is what we do. We just haven't gotten it down to a science yet. That's the part that got me super interested in 12 Monkeys, was really the idea of still testing out the time travel, but while also desperately needing it to work. And La Jetée really kind of focuses in on what the process of time travel is doing to the main character in the future while they're observing him. And I think we don't get a lot of that in 12 Monkeys, but what we do get is seeing how the time travel affects him in the past, which is arguably far more interesting.
Well, it's really here where the two films start to diverge in what their approach is going to be. La Jetée is very focused on being a morality play for humanity. It is a warning of the true hell that the destruction of humanity would actually bring upon the survivors. And it is much more ruminative on the war, because, of course, that was present in all post-war culture. 12 Monkeys, in these scenes, becomes more about the perspective of characters. You are offered the perspective of Brad Pitt's character, Jeffrey Goings, who is genuinely very unhinged in almost a bipolar sort of way. He goes off on very imaginative, paranoid rants about what to trust in the world, what is a construct of society, all of these sort of spoutings of madness, if you will. And you juxtapose that with Bruce Willis in these scenes as James Cole, who comes across as very sober and serious, but when he tries to explain what he needs to do to a panel of psychologists, saying, no, they were supposed to send me to 1996. I'm in 1990. This is the wrong year. I'm not supposed to be in this year. Or if you'll just let me make one phone call. I'm supposed to call this number and leave a message, and then calling it and having it just be a woman taking care of her kids and saying it's not the right number yet. He ultimately comes across as the madman here, even though he is the one who is trying to, in a very serious and structured way, solve the mystery of where the virus came from in this time. And meanwhile, Jeffrey is having the time of his life, going mad without any responsibilities.
Yeah, it is a cool foil, those two characters, especially in this first scene in the mental institute, right? You do see Jeffrey spouting what seems to be obscenities, but also pretty logical, which is, I feel like, a really cool sign of the depth and a first sign of, like, things are gonna get a little hectic here. And they definitely start to scale up after we do get the introduction of the doctor. What was her name again?
Dr. Riley.
Dr. Riley, yes. She is amazing. Sorry. Love it. But we get to see her too and her perception of reality and how she is very invested on figuring out the truth and really trying to help Cole in his situation, even though Cole seems to be only focused on his objective rather than trying to really understand the situation that he's in, and that kind of leads him to his demise, where he kind of spirals out a bit, and the panelists in the mental institution is forced to put the tranquilizer in, and sure enough, that causes a very interesting situation.
Oh yeah, that's right. You know, the moment he's out, he pops right back into his version of the present, this world that has been ravaged by the virus. He disappears for everybody in 1990 and leaves them with this question of how this man escaped being, chained down in a locked room with no exit. And in his time, meanwhile, he's left to face this panel of doctors who are inquisitive about, why he didn't achieve, why he didn't succeed. He has to explain to them that they had failed in their attempt to send him back to the proper time. And he realizes he's going to have to go through a longer and more drawn-out experimentation process. I do think it's interesting to note here the parallels between Madeleine Stowe's character, Dr. Riley, and the woman in La Jetée who calls the man her ghost. She's really the person who is the one skeptic in this film. She's the one person who's willing to look at all perspectives and to make her decisions based on what the prevailing perspective is based on evidence. So early on, she's obviously a skeptic. She believes that James Cole has a divergent personality and isn't actually from the future, that he is just mentally ill and needs help. But as Cole reappears to her again 6 years later in a rather violent way, he carjacks and kidnaps her. Suddenly, she's being presented in a very traumatic environment with new facts about the situation and new potential inflection points through which she can judge reality. And so the film, if it's about one character, it's almost about her shifts as a person more than it is about James Cole as our protagonist.
Oh, totally. She's really, I feel, a very strong principal character in this film. Probably one of the reasons why I like it so much, because it's funny that you get to the point where he does his second time travel back, and it's a very funny situation, right? Dr. Riley's now like an expert on this like apocalypse syndrome, or this, this doomsday complex topic. She's like so good at it. She's at like having book signings and having sermons on them or whatever, and it's very funny. You're starting to see the consequences of maybe what it Cole's presence has done to the past, ? And just as soon as it's in the clear for Dr. Riley, he shows up again, and now her very reality is almost being skewed. She's been presented quite a few convincing images, at least for the viewer, but we have our back knowledge, photographs of people who have claimed it throughout history, but her angle is still these people are deranged, or this is a complex that's been around for a while. And now Bruce Willis comes back and is really just giving her a lot of cans, too many cans of worms, for her to really comprehend, but somehow she's still interested, even in threatening, traumatic situations. Were times where maybe it seems like the power isn't in her control. Dr. Riley actually does have a pretty solid control in the situation if this guy wasn't actually from the future, which I thought was cool, right? She's hostage, but at the same time, she worked her way into becoming control over the situation, trying to make Cole believe that this reality in the past is the real reality. And I think things start to go really hazy for Cole in this situation.
Well, it does make sense that it would go hazy for him, because she presents a lot of convincing, grounded points to his kind of very haywire, sort of seat-of-your-pants mission. He's been charged with looking for this army of 12 monkeys who the members of his present are convinced are behind the virus. And this leads him back to, Jeffrey Goings, who is now this kind of petulant rich kid whose father runs a, lab that tests on animals, which is where Bruce Willis is convinced the virus comes from. He is, searching around homeless areas in Philadelphia where, homeless lunatics have been thrown out onto the street, and is, looking at paint trails and following graffiti to try and find answers. He and Dr. Riley are getting caught up in, pet stores, wrapping up employees in cling film and interrogating them about Brad Pitt's character Jeffrey Goings. It's a very unhinged journey that he is leading Dr. Riley through. And so it makes almost more sense in his sort of weird, visceral reactions to the world that he would start to conceive of himself as crazy. But meanwhile, Dr. Riley keeps getting presented with reality after reality that shows her that this guy actually is from her future.
Yeah, and at that point there, it's really when the pieces for the viewer and for Dr. Riley are starting to come together. Dr. Riley starts to become, almost obsessive with the situation. And sure enough, when Cole decides to disappear yet again, I don't think it's a decision, though. I'm still trying to figure out the consequences in which he gets sent back to the future. I don't know yet. But conveniently gone, it really does start to give that proper evidence for Riley to really, alter her perspective on reality and actually genuinely entertain the idea that, Cole might actually be right. This might actually be someone from the future. And the things he's been saying might lead up, especially when she finds a photograph of our guy when he's time skipping through different eras to just further solidify the possibility that this might actually be real.
And the cool thing about the way the film is constructed as well is, like La Jetée, 12 Monkeys has a shooting technique that makes it very unique and visceral. You notice it at first in the insane asylum, when the camera in literally every shot is off-kilter. Nothing is allowed to be perfectly up or down or side to side. Everything is at a kind of a perverse, tilted angle. You do have anchored shots in the film with Dr. Riley, as her frames are at the opening of her journey through the film very composed, very traditional. But the more she goes down this rabbit hole and the crazier she herself becomes, her shots start going off kilter too. To the point where when Cole comes back for the third time and is now convinced that he is mentally ill and he wants Dr. Riley to help her, Dr. Riley is the crazy one who is now convinced of the fact that this virus is going to kill billions of people. She's even spray painted a warning on the side of a building. She's, completely losing it. She gets, attacked by a pimp and has to be fought off by Bruce Willis. They get involved in these crazy situations in these derelict areas of town that someone in her position, a respected medical professional, would never be caught dead in. But suddenly, through this journey, she has begun visually and literally a descent into madness.
I love it. It's such a great execution with the play of the camera angles there, because we called it out instantly when we started to see them. One, because they really are done so well here, to bring that feeling, that captivatedness. I know it's not a word. All right, guys, shut up. But it is for me, because not only does it portray that descent into madness, but it really brings you in on the scenes. You're not really lost trying to contemplate whether or not this time travel works or what is going to happen. We have the derivative. We need to see the outcome. Will this information happen? What's going to happen to Cole? That's what we want to know. We care about the characters. How is Dr. Riley gonna live? Probably not, but I'm still invested. And these angles that they take in the Descent to Madness really just bring you in to where you feel like maybe you're going mad too, because you're starting to think that there might be a reality where they live. You're like, yes, paradoxes happen. At this point, you're like, I want a paradox to happen. Let the future be wrong. Let's see it happen. And the movie is so good at being true to its constraints and being true to the world that it sets. So as we see this madness spiralization, we're seeing Cole here just being completely complacent, being honestly a little triggering, I'm not going to lie, of seeing someone who's just been fully subdued, fully convinced that they were wrong, just absolutely surrenders himself to the situation and the belief that Riley had. And I really want to talk about this moment for a minute, Jack, because there's a couple things that happen. And I'm trying to figure out where it is. What is the trigger for this?
Well, BK,
what?
I got a little secret for you, because I can tell you what the trigger is, and I've been sitting on this with both La Jetée and 12 Monkeys.
Tell me.
There is a third movie we have to consider in discussing this. We're nesting layers upon layers here.
What?
But the truth is, this is a play, I feel, on perspective, and is directly related to the plot and the outcomes of Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo. Both La Jetée and 12 Monkeys go to great lengths to reference the film Vertigo, whether throughout the film, as with La Jetée, or with certain scenes, like this point in 12 Monkeys. Now, you see the film toy with you overtly in 12 Monkeys because they actually go to a 24-hour Hitchcock screening where they are watching Vertigo. But there is a deeper story significance, I feel, that relates to Vertigo, which is that both Cole and Dr. Riley at this point are deluding themselves to run from the truth. There is a reality that undergirds this story. This virus is real. Millions of people are going to die. Even though it turns out that it's not Jeffrey Goings and some eco-terrorists, they're just trying to get back at his dad and release some animals. There is still the reality. There is this guy out there who wants to release the virus and cause the apocalypse. But they're allowing themselves to run away from it because in becoming unhinged, they have, in their paranoia, learned that the only two people they can trust is each other. So they have gravitated towards this perspective that the world around them is only the world of their existence together, and that is the time that matters, not actually trying to stop the events of the future from transpiring. And that is very deeply related to the central point of Vertigo. Now, you see it overtly with the tree rings in Vertigo, which are referenced in La Jetée, but that story significance undergirding it is Hitchcock through and through.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I'm glad that you pointed that out, though, too, because you always have an eye for these illusions. And I think it's right. It's the truth, right? It's that idea of, like, honestly, it's like the Gethsemane that type situation where you're, like, pleading with yourself almost like, please, like, do I not have to do this? I don't want to have to live through this fate I feel like I'm getting close to. This never-ending situation. Is it a loop? Is it a time loop? Because these are the questions you kind of start to think now when you're at the situation. You're seeing the pieces come together. You're watching them change their appearance here. You know, Cole is looking very similar to a man we've seen in flashbacks before, and our lovely doctor is now a beautiful blonde, and it really kind of clicks there at the end where it's like, oh, this is fate is starting to feel.
You know, it's so funny, though, because they start looking more and more like these familiar forms from the child's vision at the beginning of the film, but this is the peak of their delusion. They're trying to run away by changing their appearance and have this sort of romantic vision of the future to the point where Vertigo's score even comes in and gives them this sort of quasi-romantic moment with each other outside the movie theater. Now, it was exciting for me to see that, not only because it's a very interesting wrinkle of the story that they are in this search for the 12 monkeys are going to, you know, abandon that almost in favor of loving each other, but, you know, from a practical standpoint, I get to hear more music by Bernard Herrmann, and that's never a problem for me.
Oh man, yo, we sent those playlists over afterwards. It was on and popping. And it was such a good moment too, because it really gave you that sense of this bittersweet hope. Like, it's just, you were like, maybe, like I said earlier, I was like, maybe in the reality, maybe it could be happy. Like, you're in denial. The viewer, even though you know, you're like, there's no other sign. This is going to end bad, but still somewhere deep inside, you're like, the love, that little spark there of that connection within all of the madness is honestly just the tiny little bit of hope that was enough for them to commit to doing what follows next.
Well, 12 Monkeys even does you dirty because it gives you even more hope. In adapting what is my favorite scene from La Jetée, they did it in a very kind of economical way in the film, because as they're getting ready to go to the airport to run away because Bruce Willis's character has never seen the sea, and that's what he wants to do is see the sea, they are delayed in getting to the airport by the fact that the army of the 12 monkeys has released all the animals from the zoo and has locked up Christopher Plummer's character, Jeffrey Going's father, in one of the cages. And it is at this point when it clicks that the 12 monkeys are not responsible for this virus that kills billions of people. Even though Jeffrey Goings, rants at Cole and says, oh, it was your idea to wipe out these millions of people. I remember you saying that in the asylum. I thought that was brilliant. All these red flags are around Brad Pitt's character. It turns out the "we did it" that's sprayed on all of the 12 monkeys graffiti is just about releasing these animals. And BK, this is a direct parallel to the scene in the museum in La Jetée, where the protagonist finally feels like he is able to be grounded in time and feels as though he can live presently in a moment in the past. It's the same thing for Dr. Riley and James Cole in the back of this car. They have this moment of real release. They have this moment of feeling like they exist in the present reality with each other and that nothing else matters. And you're given so much hope of a happy ending, and then we get to the airport and shit gets real, BK. No other way to say it.
Oh man, it's it's just spiraling out of control. Like, it's just, whoa, we had the bow. We was Gucci. We was, oh man, yes. You know, it's like the OG debate. Like, you think you're done, you're like, okay, but then you know you're not done. Like, I think that's what's so good about this, though. It's not for 1 second do I think the film really wants you to think that the chase ever ends. So when we get to the airport now, it's like, wait a second, putting two to two together that this situation, the virus getting out, is still going to happen. And we find out via newspaper, I guess is what we want to call that. I don't know if their tabloids are the same, but we put it together that it is an assistant from the big corpo that is going to be the culprit of this outbreak. Our time travelers are assembling in the past due to all this information that our boy Cole is trying to give back to the future before this virus does in fact break out once we know who this new culprit is. So it's so much that happens in the chain of events, right? Because Bruce Willis is like, wow, we figured this out. Boom, now I need to tell this information to the people back home. But also, we never established the time exchange between information in the past getting to the future. So the time limits on when they receive that information is a little different. So we have people from the future coming to Cole telling him like, yo, you got to go through with this, or we got your message, or we need more information, things like that, which start to be a little confusing.
It's a very confusing situation, and things become more frenetic because of that confusion. But I do want to point out the elegance of the turn here and this little twist that it's not the 12 monkeys who are responsible for this. Because throughout the film, literally from the moment when Dr. Riley is doing her initial presentation on apocalypse theory, she gets a book signed by this guy, Dr. Peters, played by very venerable Hollywood character actor David Morse. And he is, clearly enamored with the apocalypse and loves the subject matter, but you don't really get much content from him in terms of him speaking or in terms of him being a presence within the main parts of the film. You see him, next to Christopher Plummer as a lab assistant when he discusses locking down the lab so that Jeffrey can't get access. He shows up at the airport almost as if by magic. And you realize that because Jeffrey and his father were both locked out of the system, that this is the one guy who can actually go out and distribute the virus. And he does this very good job of portraying this very quiet, but very sinister and determined figure within the story. So when these time travelers start coming back for contingencies, there's something that you really have to fear, because this unknown presence is now the specter of the death of billions of people.
It's super important, though, that you point that out, because it is a crucial moment. And I say confusing because it's the point where you need to tie up all of these time travel moments. Like, as the viewer, you know that this is where it's all going to come down together. And you're still wondering in the back of your mind, you're like, really? Like, the 12 Monkeys was that? Like, I think that's why I was, like, mad the first time I saw this, and why everyone I talked to about it was like, I don't know, I didn't want to watch it because there weren't any monkeys. And they were so confused why the movie was called 12 Monkeys. And I was like, well, you didn't watch, 15 minutes of the movie, clearly. Sidebar. But it is true, though. At this point, then, you're like, wow, the consequences of the actions of going back in time in the very first place, the scientists are doing are perhaps, facilitating their very own future. It is that sense of the causal, I hate this word, Jack. Can I call it something else? It's the causality.
Causality is such an important psychological concept, BK.
I know.
You can't just eradicate it for convenience.
Causality. I gotta sing it. Causality. Yes. But because of that, all of the things that they've done to try to get information is only like further perpetuating the scenario that we've been seeing from the very beginning of the film. Is it Cole's fault that this happened? I mean, if he had never said anything about Jeffrey Goings even doing anything or planting the 12 monkey seed in the first place, his father would have never beefed up the security and given the things. So all these like dominoes are rolling falling out left after right, and then you've got time guys coming in like, yo, we're trying to do what we're trying to do. We keep getting thrown back to like, an hour before you're about to not be here anymore. Any last words? And you're really like confused because you're seeing familiar faces. You're seeing someone from the future be another person, and the lines are being blurred again. Like, is this reality? For a brief moment, the first time you watch it, honestly, I started to think it wasn't even true. I was like, maybe the future was a lie because we're seeing so many familiar faces from the future in it. But then once we really get that identity of the assistant, when Dr. Riley puts the 2 and 2 together and feels like she needs to warn security about the situation, is when all of that kind of gets put to rest, and we really go back into the original plot of like, this is what happens. Yes, this was time travel, and this moment seems to have been very pivotal.
Don't you just love a Mobius strip, BK?
I do. I do.
But yeah, no, you even see everything come full circle at the very end here, because you see the very murder you saw at the beginning of the film. And indeed, just like La Jetée, it is the child watching his future self die. And it's a very poignant device in terms of using the causal loop if you're going to go with this Billy Pilgrim style of time travel. It's a very interesting deceit because you confront somebody with their reality, and though they can't conceptualize it, it's visceral to them because there is a part of their psyche that maybe understands that this is fate unfurling right in front of them. And it just really ties up 12 Monkeys in a very nice bow, and it ties up La Jetée in a very nice bow. And I appreciate that about both films because it condenses them into a story that is told within its own confines. It's trying to be a message in of itself. It's not trying to seek out extra interpretation beyond what it's offered you. It's not looking to seek a second act. It is a story that is conceived from start to finish to be the statement that it is. And that's what endures with me as two of the more potent films I've ever seen that use time travel as a concept. To be honest, these stick with me more than stuff like Terminator and Terminator 2 do, because there is such respect for the concepts being played around with. Don't get me wrong, I love the Terminator movies. Terminator 2 is the type of film I'd watch a billion times if it was on a Sunday afternoon. But that being said, the way they treat time in the Terminator series is a literal joke. And it is so nice to see material deal with such a complex science fiction subject in a very sober and serious way.
I love how you said that, though. I think it's sober and serious, yes. But also we talked about this very, very interesting tone that it has. And I want to say that there's a little bit of hope in this weird dystopian view, and I feel like that's what gets me, is how well they incorporated that little bit of light in such a very, I don't know, grim tale. That's what stuck with me, was everything about it was super, themed, very thematic, very grounded in its fantasy. But there was something very realistic and very enticing about how real the characters were and about how real that sense of hope was for everyone. I mean, in reality, that hope is the very driving force of the plot. And that's what stuck with me, was that's the theme. I feel like all the other tonal things were kind of there as the devices to really make that feeling so strong. I think they did it for me. It's like this movie was made for me. That's what I'm convinced. Like, I don't know, this may or may not be in one of my all times, which is why I'm like so excited to get to our ratings. But I do have to talk about this one little theme. We talked about a lot of themes, fate and destiny and all these types of stuff, but there's one lasting thing that I still can't grasp my head around that leave me thinking and talking about after this film for, how long has this film been out? Over 15 years? Like, come on. It's
25.
Okay, 25. See, there you go. Don't age me.
We old, BK.
I was supposed to.
Old.
You say a low number, so you know. All right. The guy, the homeless guy, he doesn't have a name. I know, right? He doesn't have a name, but there are times where we meet this guy, this homeless guy, this phantom voice, this potential volunteer that we've never seen and only heard as a voice. I don't know if he's real, Jack. I needed to ask you this. Since we've gone through this whole thing, I really wanted to save this for the podcast because I'm not sure whether or not the homeless guy that Riley runs into is really someone from the future going into the past or not. The voice that speaks to him in the cell a lot of the time even toys with the fact of like being a potential figment of his imagination. Although we never see this character when we're in the future, we do see someone who has the same exact voice and similar cadence when we are in the past. He even goes so far to say they're tracking you via teeth, but when a future time traveler comes back, Jose, he honestly makes fun of him for removing his tooth. Honestly, making out to seem like it was trivial, like it didn't even matter. So I want to know, Jack, do you think the homeless guy, the ghost phantom voice, is he real? Is he from the future? Is he in the past? What is he?
This is such a cop-out, but I don't know if I have a real answer for you on that, BK. I think that it's interesting to me from the perspective of how Terry Gilliam has in so many of his films played with mental illness as a theme. He goes into very specific images that relate to mental health problems. In particular here, the emphasis on teeth is interesting because losing your teeth is one of, if not the most common dream associated with deep clinical anxiety. It is a common fear shared by people in their dreams. And it gets back to what Gilliam got involved in this project for in the first place. He was enamored with the idea of this man jumping between dream worlds, essentially. This debate over which world he is exposed to is the real one. Which one is the delusion? Which one is the mirror image of the other, and which is the one that is grounded in reality? And I think that's where this character really comes in, because it is this character he only hears in his head, but yet it appears through both realities. It's a constant presence with him, and the best answer I can give you, BK, is that it might be indicative of the parts of him that are actually ill. And it may be an attempt by Gilliam to separate out mental illness as its own unique phenomenon and as its own unique generator of perspective within this story. And it's worth thinking about it in that way because the world that is so frequently inhabited in this film is the world of homeless people who are mentally ill. I used the word lunatics deliberately earlier because this was the votive of America's collective consciousness in the 80s and 90s. We didn't take care of mentally ill people. We threw them out of, mental hospitals. We left a lot of them to die on the street as mental ill, homeless victims. And so this guy that shares the voice and has this moment of insanity in front of Dr. Riley and Cole is the same type of character you would see portrayed with very earnest intention in a film like The Fisher King. It's a character you would see blown up in, Baron Munchausen into the Baron himself as this self-aggrandized, rich, delusory character. And I just think that's where this character comes in for me, BK. I can't give you a satisfactory answer of this is exactly the point he serves, but that's how I took him.
I take it. I think you could take what you said and run with it. I think so. I think more evidence points to him not truly being one of your time bandits. Haha, see what I did there. But it does seem very important because it is the one inconsistent thing involving time, but also coincidental. Some delusional person could really say anything to fuel further delusions coincidentally. And I think a lot of evidence does point to you being right about him being maybe a manifestation of his doubt, his fractured reality, is he's making this voice he heard kind of manifest in the future. So I think that's super, super, super awesome. And the teeth thing, bro, you just blew my mind. Because, like, yes, absolutely. The moment where he's having the teeth issue, he's literally, like, falling to the furthest low, I guess you could say, in his task. Cole isn't getting the answers he wants. He doesn't know how to solve the situation. He can't do what is expected of him during that trip when that situation does happen. So you might have actually uncovered the secret that I've been thinking for the last 20-something years, okay? Don't age me.
At the same time, I promise not to age you, BK. At the same time, it is worth noting that one of the legacies of this film is that Gilliam is so, I guess, associated with these discussions of madness and these steampunk aesthetics and this very dark satire that 12 Monkeys is considered among fans as the second movie in a 3-movie trilogy, with Brazil being the first entry and his 2013 film The Zero Theorem being the third entry, to the point where Gilliam has even jokingly conceded to his fans, I guess it is a trilogy. So it's a mood and it's a type of subject matter that Gilliam himself is very enamored by and loves to dissect and examine. And, you'd expect nothing less from a python. But it's just very interesting to see that it comes out in such a unique way in 12 Monkeys and the way that perspective is toyed with. It's probably why it was considered to be such a ripe subject and material for a TV adaptation.
Yeah, the series, yes, is actually pretty good, and the characters are very, very strong to the movie. So I'm excited to kind of go back now that I have the source material and I've seen this in its entirety. Of course, when they come out weekly, I'm never catching those when they come out, but it's all available now out there. I'm super excited to check that out again post seeing this movie. Honestly, because when you get kind of series like 12 Monkeys, you're able to really dive into those themes a bit more and kind of let it ruminate. If you do want to check out the series, that is available on Hulu. If you have that, you can take a look at that. This is not sponsored.
We are not sponsored.
This is not sponsored. And if you also would like to watch the film 12 Monkeys, that is on HBO Max. If you have that luxury of having that streaming service, you can check that out there. And then La Jetée is found.
And well, I will say, I will get ahead of you there. La Jetée is technically something that you should be finding through the Criterion Collection, but if you don't want to find it through the Criterion Collection, there are certain websites that one might know and associate very commonly with video sharing. And these sites that you share videos on the internet that are very popular might just happen to have a couple of Chris Marker's films on them. And I think, BK, do you think that gives people an idea of where they might reach out to find this as well?
Absolutely. If you can do your homework just hard enough, I think you'll be able to find a copy of this amazing, amazing film.
Well, I think we're about at that time, BK. I think we've got to give the people, I think it's 2 ratings today. I don't want us to leave La Jetée on the back burner. I think it is as worthy of a rating as a feature film here. So I want to hear what you've got on both of them.
Okay. All right, here we go. You already know what it is. Let's be honest. I'm going to go for La Jetée. I'm going to give it a solid 7. It is short and sweet. I would love to see more. I think some people like giving high ratings for those things, but I feel like, y'all had such a good concept. Let me get a bit more of it. I was so immersed. I was like, this was it, one and done. So I would have loved to see just a little bit more of that and and its execution is impeccable. So it really can't be anything lower than that, to be honest. Purely not a 10 out of 10 because it is very dated and you have to be fully immersed. You can't half watch it. And then for 12 Monkeys, for me, my baby's going to be a slightly higher rating. I'm going to go with an 8.5, not a 9, because honestly, I feel like there's still little things that are slightly confusing with this voice, and I would have loved to see this whole phantom guy fleshed out a bit more, and a little bit more love on the struggle that it had with Bruce Willis in the future, not just in the past. Those are my main things that would have made this like a 10 out of 10 for me.
Okay, very interesting. Very, very interesting. It's interesting to hear your La Jetée rating for me in particular, because I just have this suspicion that once I get my hooks in with the French New Wave with you, as far as I'm concerned, I think it's going to become one of your favorite movements, and I think that may end up, in retrospect, that may get you to hold La Jetée in a little higher esteem. Like, I want you to see the 400 Blows, and I want you to see Breathless in particular, because I think you'll fall in love with those films.
I'm here for it. Again, it was my entry point to it, and still is an entry point.
Oh, no judgment. No
judgment. I think
judgment.
it's a really solid number, so I'm actually super interested. It was a very cool experience. Like, if you're someone who's ever done, like, audio books, or, like, you're a visual novel person, I say that for our anime heads listening, I would recommend checking this stuff out. But what about you, Jack? Jack, I gotta know you. I've been dying. Like, since we've watched it, what is it? I gotta know. Tell me. La Jetée first, obviously, what? 10 out of 10? And then 12 Monkeys, what?
Well, La Jetée, I don't give it a 10 out of 10. I give La Jetée, actually, I think I give it your rating for 12 Monkeys, is I give it an 8.5. I think that it is a very important work to watch, especially if you are somebody who wants to be a filmmaker. I challenge you to both watch La Jetée and to construct films that are photo montages. Learn to tell a story through still images, and you will undergird yourself with the ability to create stories out of moving images like you're doing it in your sleep. And I think that it's a challenge that I love responding to. It was the subject of some of my favorite exercises as a film student, just doing photographs as film. And I think that lost art is something that makes it really valuable for me culturally. I agree with you. It's a film that you have to fully invest in. It is a film that, through both the French and the English narration, no matter which voice that you're listening to, it is very high concept dialogue, very philosophical, and therefore very hard to digest. And it does make it a less accessible film within the French New Wave as a result. But I do still hold it in a very high regard, and what it has taught me about film is something that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. With 12 Monkeys, it's close, but I give it an 8, I think, just slightly under La Jetée. And it's not because of the comparison to the source material that it falls a little bit lower. It's because I would have liked to have a little bit more access into the world. I think there was a true elegance about the story, but I think there were moments at which the film did jump a little bit and did miss some moments to give us a little bit more character investment to make those moments at the end when the visions of the past and the present come together. I think there was a way to make that a little bit more meaningful by adding a little bit more context. But I am not disappointed whatsoever to have gone through this film on my first viewing. It's something I'm very lucky to have seen, and I'm very glad we got to watch it.
Yes, I'm glad you pointed out that. I think we have similar complaints in it. Like, there's beats in 12 Monkeys where you're like, man, like, we could have ruminated a bit more with the prisoners, seen how that shaked out, let's see, how this is affecting his psyche a little bit more than IRL, and really just getting a chance to explore the world that they work so hard in building. But Jack, I had to tell myself when I was thinking about that too, I'm like, damn, this was a 2-hour movie. Was I ready for 3 hours? Because that's what I kind of wanted. So I challenge us both to check out the series because it actually gives you a little bit more of that because it is a series in that format.
I'm conflicted just simply because of what Gilliam's critique was, is he was very worried about the fact that Chris Marker passed away before any concerns or discussion of development on the series. And I think it's relevant for Gilliam to bring up the point that he's concerned that he's not sure what Marker would think about it. Is Marker was reluctant to get 12 Monkeys made at the outset, and the idea that that work could become derivative, could become, the way Gilliam said, quote-unquote, just another Time Bandits, is, a legitimate concern to have, because the source material is so specialized. But I do think I should, in the nature of fairness, give it a chance.
I'd love to see it. I mean, just another Bandits. There are so many time travel films out there that are pretty much that. So I think that's a pretty fair critique on Gilliam's part.
And also, BK, we keep just leading our viewers in the month of love. We keep just leading them through these love stories that just have really, just profoundly shitty endings.
I know.
and next week, we're going into the world of noir, so if you're looking for ill-fated romances, we've got the hookup, BK.
It's starting to say something for us. We must really like, tragedy, bittersweet, love, desperation, emotional pieces.
It's almost like millennials are scarred by the events of their lives or something.
Who would have thought? So, Jack, let them know what we're actually getting into in the next episode.
Oh, next week, we are going back in time. We are heading all the way back, BK, to 1949 and the height of the age of film noir, because we are going to be watching Carol Reed's The Third Man, which he did with Joseph Cotten and Orson Welles, joining together on the screen the same way they did in Citizen Kane. Now, BK, I'm so glad we get to go back and see Third Man, yet another film that I was influenced by in film school. But it is this great work of noir and this very subversive film in many, many ways. And I'm excited to see you watch something way far back, because I know, Psycho, got you into it a little bit, but I know you don't usually vibe with that black and white, vibe with that old classic era of film. But I think noir will leave you pleasantly surprised.
I know. I'm glad you said that. So I do this for our listeners out there who might not be interested like me as well. I am a new blood to when it comes to these classic pieces. We like to ship them all off as classics. I know you love your distinctions, Jack, so I'm very excited to learn about what makes them different.
BK, this is a classic. This film is, in 2021, this film is 72 years old.
Oh my.
Like, that is a classic. That is an out-and-out classic.
Okay, understood. See, I don't know, right? Again, making sure, because I just ship anything that's, dated. It's just, they're all classics. Okay, all of them. So
Yeah, but when you start talking about, the 90s as being dated, I feel attacked.
Okay, understood. I will never. I swear by it. Never. It's not happening. So I'm super excited to see what The Third Man is going to be like. This is right out of my wheelhouse, so I'm going to be very reactive and super intrigued about what kind of elements that they used here to kind of create the film. I do appreciate things on that side of the production side of things and on the theatric side of things, so I'm really interested to see acting, performance. I know those things are way stronger in older works, so that's what I'm really looking forward to. So you've got me so excited, Jack.
You know what? We're also back in post-war Europe, so if you want some of those early vibes of, realist cinema of the new wave, you're going to get little inklings of that too, because the British were wise to it as well. They have a very different film tradition, but it doesn't mean they weren't impacted by what was going on the continent.
Heck yes, this is going to be fantastic. So you guys better be sure to stay tuned to check out next week's episode. If you want to know where you can find us out in the interwebs, we are on Twitter at RFN_podcast, and we are live on Instagram at Revenge of the Film Nerds. Starting to get things coming out into the next month. It's going to be super dope. So please give us a follow, give us a little love, a like, a little shout out there if those are your places of residence online. I want to thank everyone so much for listening to us. I know things have been really crazy as of late, so doing the podcast and having you guys here with us is amazing. It means the world to us. Now, Jack.
Yeah, we are grateful to have you guys every time listening to us on this show. It is a labor of love for us. You know, we keep doing what we can to make refinements and improvements, and we're glad to have you along on that journey. For my part, you want to find me online, you're going to find me on Twitter and Instagram at ManlyJackManly. You're going to find me on Discord and on Twitch at A Waste of Space. And I am just going to keep, moving on with this endeavor, keep being a part of this BK harem and the BK experience, helping bring you these quality podcasts every time I can. And BK, you're going to keep bringing them quality content on your own networks as well, right?
Obviously. Thank you so much for that. I know I'm so excited to have you and everyone in the community always pulling through to all these things. I'm out here live as always on Twitch Mondays and Wednesdays, and I'm on Instagram and Twitter doing the things and working my way back to YouTube. So yes, you will be seeing new content coming out on there, and hopefully we can get the podcast living out on different platforms like that in the near future too. So be sure to keep your eyes out on all things coming your way for Revenge of the Film Nerds. I am Black Crystal, and with me today was the lovely, the extraordinary, let 'em hear it, Jack Manly. Jack Manly.
Manly Jack Manly. I am the man, the manly man who does those things that no man can, and we are so thankful that you listened to us today. Take care, guys.
Yes, good night, and see you next time, Johnny.